January 7, 2016. Florida State Prison. After 30 years on death row, Oscar Ray Bolin Jr. walked his final steps toward a lethal injection chamber. Behind him lay 3 decades of legal battles, appeals, and a justice system tested to its limits. Ahead lay the end of a story that began in 1986 with 3 brutal murders that terrorized the Tampa Bay area. This is the story of how justice, though delayed, ultimately prevailed against one of Florida's most notorious serial killers. Tampa Bay, Florida. 1986, a year that would be forever etched in the memory of a community as 3 young women's lives were brutally cut short by a predator who showed no mercy and felt no remorse. Terry Lynn Matthews, 26 years old, was the first to fall victim to Bolin's violence. A woman with her whole life ahead of her, beaten and stabbed to death in an act of senseless brutality that shocked even seasoned investigators. 17-year-old Stephanie Collins followed. A teenager who should have been thinking about graduation, college, her future. Instead, she became another name on a killer's list, another family destroyed by unthinkable violence. Finally, Natalie Holly, 25, completed this tragic trilogy. 3 women, 3 families, 3 lives stolen by a man who saw other human beings as nothing more than objects for his violent fantasies. But what Oscar Ray Bolin Jr. didn't count on was the determination of law enforcement officers who would never stop hunting him, and a justice system that, despite its flaws, would ultimately hold him accountable for every life he took. While Bolin thought he had escaped justice for the Tampa murders, he had made a critical error. Predators rarely stop with their first crimes, and Bolin's pattern of violence followed him beyond Florida's borders. In Ohio, Bolin's criminal behavior escalated to kidnapping and rape. He held a woman at gunpoint, subjecting her to hours of terror that would haunt her forever. But this time, there was a survivor. This time, there was a witness who could identify him. When Bolin pleaded guilty to those Ohio charges, accepting a sentence of 25 to 75 years, he believed he had found a way to avoid facing justice for his more serious crimes. He was wrong. Tampa Bay investigators had never stopped working the Matthews, Collins, and Holly cases. Evidence was analyzed, witness statements were reviewed, and slowly but surely, all roads began leading to the same suspect, Oscar Ray Bolin Jr. The breakthrough came through meticulous police work and advances in forensic science. What Bolin had thought were perfect crimes became solvable cases as investigators connected physical evidence to their prime suspect. The arrest came while Bolin was already behind bars in Ohio, serving time for his conviction there. When Tampa Bay detectives arrived at the Ohio prison to arrest him for the 3 Florida murders, Bolin's facade of confidence finally began to crack. He was extradited to Florida to face 3 separate first-degree murder charges. 3 trials. 3 opportunities for justice to be served for Terry Lynn Matthews, Stephanie Collins, and Natalie Holly. The legal proceedings that followed would span decades and test the patience of victims' families who deserved answers and closure. But throughout every appeal, every legal maneuver, every attempt to delay justice, one thing remained constant. The evidence against Oscar Ray Bolin Jr. was overwhelming. Prosecutors methodically presented their cases, connecting Bolin to each crime through physical evidence, witness testimony, and his own pattern of violent behavior. The juries, faced with the brutal reality of what Bolin had done, reached the only verdict that justice demanded: guilty on all counts. 3 death sentences. 1 for each life he had taken. 1 for each family he had destroyed. The American justice system is designed with safeguards, appeals processes, and multiple reviews to ensure that no innocent person faces execution. While these protections sometimes frustrate those seeking swift justice, they serve a crucial purpose in maintaining the integrity of our legal system. For 30 years, Bolin's case moved through various courts as his attorneys filed appeal after appeal. At times, legal technicalities threatened to overturn convictions, forcing prosecutors to retry cases and victims' families to relive their worst nightmares in courtroom after courtroom. But through every setback, every delay, every legal challenge, one truth remained unchanged. Oscar Ray Bolin Jr. had murdered 3 innocent women, and the evidence proving his guilt was unshakable. Perhaps the most bizarre chapter in this long saga was Bolin's marriage to a member of his own defense team while on death row. Even as he faced execution for his crimes, Bolin continued to manipulate those around him, finding someone willing to believe his protestations of innocence despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. But manipulation and legal maneuvering could only delay justice for so long. The evidence was too strong, the crimes too heinous and the determination of prosecutors too unwavering. January 7, 2016. After 3 decades on death row, Oscar Ray Bolin Jr.'s final appeals had been exhausted. At age 53, he would finally face the ultimate consequence for his crimes. Even in his final hours, Bolin maintained his innocence, refusing to acknowledge the pain he had caused or show any remorse for the lives he had taken. He requested a last meal of ribeye steak, baked potato, lemon meringue pie, and Coca-Cola, a final indulgence for a man who had denied his victims any mercy. At 10:16 p.m., Oscar Ray Bolin Jr. was pronounced dead by lethal injection. The man who had terrorized Tampa Bay in 1986 could never hurt anyone again. Justice, though delayed by 30 years, had finally been served. In the end, this story isn't really about Oscar Ray Bolin Jr., it's about Terry Lynn Matthews, who at 26 had so much life left to live. It's about Stephanie Collins, whose 17th year should have led to graduation, not tragedy. It's about Natalie Holly, whose 25 years of life were cut short by senseless violence. These 3 women were daughters, sisters, friends. They had dreams, hopes, and people who loved them deeply. Their families waited 30 years for justice, never giving up hope that the man who took their loved ones would finally be held accountable. The long delay between crime and punishment in this case highlights both the strengths and challenges of our justice system. While the appeals process ensured that every legal safeguard was observed, it also meant that families waited 3 decades for closure. But in the end, the system worked as it was designed to work. Evidence was carefully examined, legal procedures were followed, and justice was ultimately served. Today, Oscar Ray Bolin Jr.'s name is recorded in the annals of Florida's criminal history as a reminder that no matter how long it takes, no matter how many legal challenges are mounted, justice will eventually find those who commit heinous crimes. His execution marked the end of one of the longest-running death penalty cases in Florida history, but more importantly, it marked the final chapter in a story that began with 3 brutal murders in 1986. For the families of Terry Lynn Matthews, Stephanie Collins, and Natalie Holly, January 7, 2016, wasn't just the date of Bolin's execution. It was the day they could finally say that justice had been served for their loved ones, even though it came 30 years too late. The case of Oscar Ray Bolin Jr. reminds us that while justice delayed can be justice denied, sometimes the long arc of the law does bend toward justice. Sometimes the system works, even when it takes 3 decades to get there. In memory of the victims, and in recognition of those who never stopped fighting for justice on their behalf, this case stands as proof that some crimes are so heinous, some evidence so compelling, that no amount of time or legal maneuvering can ultimately prevent accountability. Oscar Ray Bolin Jr. may have evaded justice for 30 years, but in the end, justice found him.